And thank you so much for joining me on The Way Forward. I'm Eddie Francis, and joining me is the good doctor herself, Dr. Andrea Boyles. She joins us so much on WBOK. She hangs out with us on the Good Morning Show, and I've had the opportunity to sit with her on the Good Morning Show, and she is the pride of Lincoln University, Missouri. How are you, ma'am?
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction. It makes me smile.
Well, good. That's how I try to start these things. I want people smiling. You said something to me once on the Good Morning Show, and I want to come back to it in just a little bit. But you said something to me on the air. Well, you told the audience this. You weren't just talking to me about how we need more love in the Black community. We need to show that love, but we need to operationalize that love. I was
Absolutely.
fascinated by the language there. And so I want to come back to that in just a little bit, but just so that this audience can get to know you, talk about your research and talk about what it is that you teach.
Absolutely. And, for starters, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a joy to exchange with you. And I appreciate the opportunity to extend our conversation from WBOK. And so, that said, my research or my body of work, really and truly, the through line is Black resistance. I say Black resistance and social justice, and where those two things meet. And so I run a gamut as a sociologist and criminologist with a number of areas in particular that fall into my wheelhouse or subject matters, so to speak. And so that could be anything from police brutality to gender inequality. That's certainly an area of concentration. So I do quite a bit of gender work, more specifically, Black feminism. Also, other areas that fall into my purview of expertise would be what I refer to as racial spatial politics. A lot of my work is rooted, all of my work, I won't even say a lot, all of my work, because I can't see any other way to do what I do without it being undergirded in socio-historical dynamics, and so that matters to me. And so I do, not only do I have, maybe I'll say it that way, not only do I have all these variations of areas ranging economics, gender, corrections or criminality and the legal system and all those kinds of things, but also I am a public facing scholar. So, for example, I do work like what we're doing now. I am a member of the National Association of Black Journalism journalists, and so I do communications work to as an extension of my research, as an extension of my scholarship, and so also I am what many would think of and refer to as a community engaged scholar, which means I'm not just doing or conducting research for the sake of conducting research. I am actually immersed in the community. So, another way to think about it is that I'm an ethnographer. Some would say, I'm an activist scholar, because I don't work separate of the people, so to speak. I work in tandem with the people. I am of the people, and I am busy, doing the work of social change with the people. And so I don't see my work separate of theirs, except that, they maybe we are operating, between 8 and 5 or otherwise, because this work certainly supersedes, a 40-hour a week type schedule. That's really not a thing, not in this sense, but yeah. So we just operate from different lanes. But the bottom line is that, again, coming full circle, my work is rooted in Black resistance and social justice, and where those two things meet and how they show up, historically and across spaces and places, concerning Black people particularly. But then also there's an opportunity to think about that widely and broadly, meaning globally in terms of humanity, just generally speaking.
So that morning, when you said you wanted to see us operationalize Black love, what did you mean by that?
Well, so the thing is, I think our conversation emerged on the heels of us thinking about all these social dynamics that are playing out currently in our society, right? All these different uphill battles that we and challenges that we're seeing. And so, and meaning 2026, like in the immediate, right? And so I think it was really about trying to figure out like how we can move forward as a people with so many hurdles that seems to, whether we're thinking about, and when I say hurdles, I want to be clear. So just to give an example, if we're thinking about like recent rollbacks with Voting Rights Act, if we're thinking about things like, more recently, if we're thinking about things like, the young man, in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, that is Nolan Wells, and other youth or other circumstances where Black people come to find themselves either dead, for lack of better words, or in harm's way, physically, mentally, and otherwise. There's a gamut that, and a litany of things that I think sparked this idea and this conversation between you and I about love and operationalizing it. And for me, what I was meaning within that context, but also within the context of history, was thinking about how, not necessarily that we don't love ourselves, but thinking about how we can revisit that and articulate that in our community and what it means to us over the centuries as a people who are not, I don't want to say we are a wounded people, but we are certainly a people that have had to deal with quite a bit of harm and that have been wounded. So there's a distinction. We're not a wounded people or a hurt people, but we are a people that have been hurt
Yeah.
and a people that have had wounds as a result of that and those harms. And so much so until I feel like, and research, my own research, in fact, has shown me and revealed to me that in more ways than one, as a result of those harms, those historical harms, we find up to the current, we find ourselves oftentimes trying to survive and so focused on just being in or finding ourselves in survival mode and trying to overcome trauma or reeling from it to the degree that we never really tap into, like, or at least really get to think about what love means. Or maybe it is in the harm that we have an idea, but not one that is rooted sometimes in healing, in being whole, in being healed, in being individually empowered, or feeling individually empowered, or how we talk about ourselves, how we think about ourselves individually, but then also how we think about ourselves collectively, as a
Mhm.
people. I think that, by and large, and I hope this is clear because there's so much. In fact, let me say this. I don't mean to confuse you or the listeners. That's certainly not the idea. I think the point that I really want to, reiterate is that there's so much all the time that has such negative and dire impacts, long lasting dire impacts on our community. So much so until we are often not really able to take rest in who we are as a loving, caring, kind people, except that we're doing that in the fight, like we're
Mhm.
in the heat of battle,
Yeah. Yeah.
extending that. But like, what does that mean to not be at war, so to speak, or not feel like you're pressed and your back is against the wall or you're cornered? Like, then what does love mean in that sense? What does it look like to not, feel like you're clinging to life? And so I think that sometimes that makes for different definitions, and how we experience those things and how we're able to give it, but also how we're able to receive it.
Yeah, you know what, I'm telling you what I'm thinking about as an example. What could be an example? So tell me if this tracks with you and what you're talking about. I'm going to use the workplace as an example,
Sure.
where there was one story that an HBCU president told me that you know everyone was having a rough time. It was close to the holidays. People around the university were really tired. And one of the maintenance people, or one of the facilities people, went to him and said, Doc, all these people are really tired. Everybody's really frustrated. So he decided to release everyone 2 days before the holiday break started, because his thing was, yeah, I see what's happening. Everybody's tired, and we just work so hard. And inside of that story was, we black folks, and we work
Sure.
real hard. We work a
Sure.
lot harder than people think, and people need to rest. So I'm gonna do this thing. I have enough flexibility to give 2 extra days, and I'm going to do that for these people who deserve to do it. And again, it was at an HBCU, so blackness was embedded in that whole decision making process. Would that track with what you're talking about as far as operationalizing love?
Well, so okay. For starters, let me say this. One, I want to be clear that I know that we are caring people. I think we all understand that, generally speaking. And when I say people, I'm talking specifically about Black people, our community. I know that we know that. I don't think we often communicate it that way, that we are a people that take care of one another. We have not been socialized to have those kinds of conversations. And even to the degree when we do hear them and have them, they're often competing with this idea that we regurgitate in our own community, that says things like, that's demeaning, like, like, we can't stand together. We are not unified. We can't get along. We can't, it's we a lot of times feel like we are our own worst enemy, or that there is something pathologically wrong with us. Like, we buy into that broader narrative a lot of times, and
Like
if
like
we're
like
not buying,
like blackness is the problem.
yeah, like we are our
Yeah.
worst, we're the problem. We buy into that. And even if and I think that's not happening all the time, but it happens a lot, that we recycle these oppressive ideas about who we are as a people. And so I think there's a consequence to that. We're saying it, but then also then acting in that sometimes. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to challenge that, right? We've been socialized, just like we can think about the broader culture as having, meaning the broader society, one after the other, as having been socialized historically to believe that there is something inherently wrong with Black people, that nothing good can come from Black people or a Black person, or that there is something very skewed. We can sort of run a gamut, right, on all these different negative perceptions that extend well back to the onset of, the colonialism in this nation, even the very constructing of race in and of itself, and these ideas about blackness that has not just been ideas that have been created and then therefore disseminated among predominantly white audiences or other non-black people. Those are also ideas that have been in some ways also picked up and recycled and repeated among our own people. And so we can use examples for what I'm saying. One example might be, and I think you and I talked about that briefly, would be the baby doll test.
Yeah.
Mamie and Kenneth Clark talked about the baby doll. They introduced, actually, and the baby doll test, this historical test where they, had a black baby doll and a white baby doll and allowed black children essentially to weigh in about what their thoughts were concerning those dolls, which one they preferred and how they thought about them, why did they prefer one over the other, and those kinds of things. We know that emerged during segregation, and the idea, for those theorists was about helping us to understand like what the consequences were of racial segregation and the like. But there's a lot to pull from that, right? And so there we had babies, black children sitting there literally saying they preferred the white baby dolls over the black dolls because they were nicer, because they were prettier, because they were smarter, because they were good. And so these were their thoughts about the white dolls, while contrarily, their thoughts about the black baby doll, which looked most like them, they said were bad. They were bad. They were negative. They were not smart. They were ugly. There were just these, that comes from learning. There is a learning process. And so while I'm referencing that, is that's one of many examples that I'm just using simply. There's countless others, of course, and unfortunately, but that's one example of many where, again, we are a part of society, so much so that despite the fact non-black populations might have been taught and learned these various ideas about negative ideas and biases about black people, we're part of the society, we're not separate of the world. And so we have learned that too, so much so until we repeat it, like the babies, right? We repeat it as babies, some of us are repeating it as adults, and some of us are continuing to do that and act the part. And so what I'm saying is that we are a people who are quite the contrary. Those constructed ideas about what blackness is and blackness means that have had these denigrative effects, or denigrating effects on our people, that's totally not, it is not who we are. And so when I say operationalize, what I'm saying is I would like, because we know how to be unified people. We have always operated as a collective. We know how to come together. We have a long-standing tradition in the African American community and otherwise where black folks know how to gather. We are people that emerge from the village, right? One
Hmm.
after the
Hmm.
other. And so life for us didn't begin in the US. Life for us is diasporic, and so we can track that all around the world, black folks knowing how to come together. And but what my point is ultimately is that I would like for us and to think about how to operationalize love in the sense that we change the narrative, that we talk about love in our community not as being some distant thing, but being a thing that we can also have, and that is very much a part of liberation. Liberation isn't just about the idea of, I think we think about that sometimes, liberation of freedom and all these kinds of things, racial freedoms and so forth, as being just solely connected to legislation, like for example, yes, the Voting Rights Act and things like that, or, changes in that way. Those are all important and valuable. But I think that also it's about us understanding that, we liberation is about challenging and having these paradigm shifts where we don't have to think about loving or people being worthy of love and being able to give love,
Got it.
among everybody else and for everybody else, and then somehow not necessarily for us, ourselves, our own community.
So if okay, so if you had to remix the scenario that I gave, how would you remix it? Because because it sounds like it. Well, no, how would you remix it so
So
that it
the
is operationalized?
So I think what I would like to say is that we need to operation my position is that we need to operationalize the narrative of love in our community, and increase opportunities for love. It's not that it doesn't exist. I think we need to increase opportunities. Again, going back and just to be clear, operationalize the narrative surrounding love, meaning how we think about, but also how we talk about it. And
So
then therefore how we engage or continue to engage in it in a way that increases and exacerbates all opportunities for it, and do that with and again, I'm emphasizing doing that with a clear mind. So how do you do that, right? With a clear mind, clear presence of thought, when you are embattled, and when you feel so very deeply embattled from every angle.
yeah, and so I hate to go back to my
There's a lot.
scenario,
I feel like
but you know
I'm
what? But
almost,
no,
yeah.
but you help me see the flaw in my scenario. So the flaw in my scenario is that I framed what this president did as a response to suffering, as opposed to the president making the decision proactively because his people deserve it. And these and people deserve to have those extra days because, as Black folks, this is what we do work hard, we do have these results, we produce we make this university run, and so I see where the flaw was. And the other thing is, what you're making me think of also is, there was this quote by Desmond Tutu that I wrote in this ebook that I wrote, and it was about Ubuntu. And the quote was that a person is a person through other persons. You can't be human in isolation. And so what you're making me think about the principle of Ubuntu, where, you know I am because you are, and therefore because you are, I am. And so you're making me think about how the way we do operationalize this is recognizing each other, first of all, as human beings who do what human beings do, but then also recognizing that we are proud human beings who have a reason to be proud of ourselves, because of who we are, because of what we do, because of what we produce, and making decisions based on what we do well and who we are. Am I getting closer?
You are, and I would
I'm
go back to,
almost there.
yes, and I would go back to the example of the presidency, the president example that you use, because I am thinking about Trisha Hershey, excuse me, Trisha Hershey, book, Rest is Resistance.
Mhm.
And so we don't have to earn rest. Rest is a
Right.
part of humanity.
Yes, that's yeah,
Rest
that's the
is
flaw. That's the
humanity.
flaw I
We
was
don't
thinking
have
about in my
we
scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that would be an example of how we think about love. Like love is a human emotion. It's a human experience. And
Mhm.
so it's very much a part of humanity. So the idea when we start thinking about like liberation and freedom and advancing our people and our community, we can also think about those kinds of things in because I do the work of resistance, right?
Mhm.
We can think about love even as resistance. We can think, and the
Yeah.
idea, because the idea was that in the transatlantic slave trade was not that was not so we could love each other,
Right.
so we could
Right.
love on ourselves. It was quite the contrary. There was nothing about the institutionalizing of African people that was rooted in love.
Yeah. And
It was never intended for us to love ourselves. So, the same way we can think about it never being intended for us to be recognized as with our full humanity, to be recognized, also understanding that baked in that humanity are all these variations of emotions like love, joy,
yeah.
like all of these things. It with the institutionalizing of slavery was never, it was not that we would just not ever see life outside of a plantation, but it was also about us not ever being able to see life in terms of humanity, our own humanity, our own inner existence, not just physical, but all the things that make us who we are, and that should be extended and understood, that make up who we are as human beings and not property.
This makes me think about this makes me think about oh, there was this guy I saw speak named Alan Stein Jr. And I remember part of his keynote at a conference I went to was accountability is something you do for someone. And every time I've heard people talk about accountability, especially Black folks, it's always been framed as correction. I have to hold you accountable because you're not doing enough of, because you never do, because you're not good enough to. So I have to hold you accountable. But what he was saying is that you hold people accountable because you see the best in them. And so you say, hey, I want to get more of this out of you. I want to see more of this talent. I love the way you shine. I love the way you dribble. I love the way you calculate. I love the way you do these things. And that what you're saying is making me think about how I have reframed accountability in my mind. Because every time somebody's ever told me, Eddie, I want to hold you accountable, black, white, or whatever, I've always felt as if I needed to be corrected. And my blackness was always part of it. It
Well,
was
and so
always part of it.
yes, and so that to not forget, I'm thinking as you're talking, and so I am thinking about the call out and call in versus the call in.
Yes, yes, yes.
You've been, it sounds like you've been used, which many of us would understand, the call out, not necessarily being called in. And so the latter of what you were saying is like, I'm holding you accountable because there's this incredible greatness about who you are, and these gifts, these wonderful talents and gifts, and and that the call in, right, is
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah. What was the sister's name? Loretta Ross, who talked about calling in versus call it out. I think that's her. Yeah.
so we can, so those are things that, and even as you were talking, and saying that, right, like, so even if somebody's calling in, right, and so there's some love in that, to call
Mm-hmm.
in, right,
Mm-hmm.
but now there's a second part of it, is to, am I positioned to accept the call in?
Because this goes along the lines of, hey brother, hey sister, let me straighten your crown without making a big deal of it. But if you turn around and say, don't touch my crown,
Because wait a minute.
who are you to straighten my crown? My crown was never crooked in the first
Because
place.
what moment did you catch me in? And what
Right.
day?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm not, could wait a minute. I mean, like, where are we at? It could be the right thing, but not at the right moment, not at the right time. You caught me, like, if I am doing battle,
Yeah.
I might not interpret that as you straightening my crown.
Right. I mean, yeah, if you're doing
I don't
battle, it,
know, right?
it, it, it could be you're straightening a crown because you think something is wrong with me or you're trying to make me look bad.
It could be, and it's not to also say that periodically or every now and then there might be an anomaly where that could be true.
Right.
But I'm
Yeah.
just saying, I think we're saying the same thing, just
We
generally
are.
speaking, right? Like, we might not even define that as love.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
first off, like, how do we know what love is? We can go all the way. It's so many levels to this and so many dynamics, because first of all, do we know who we are? Might that make a difference? If I know who I am, might it make a difference if you try to straighten my crown? Might I be more receptive?
So yeah, I
You
like that
see me, I
question.
don't see me.
I like that question because to me, it would be done in love if number one, I know you like your crown straight. If I know you want to wear it straight, if I know this, and then I go to you and I straighten it without making a big deal, call in. straighten it, and then you say thank you because I didn't even know. I mean, to me, that's a love exchange. And to
Yes,
me, what happens is that both of us get to walk around with our chests out. We get to operate in a clear-headed way. We get to decide things in a clear-headed way, and we get to communicate in a clear-headed way. Because that was that moment of helping, and it wasn't because of distress. It was because, ooh, wait a minute, ooh, I want to help this person because I know how they like to do things, and I know how they like to present themselves. So I'm going to
sure.
be there to help them be their best selves. And so that kind of goes. I think that kind of feels like what we're saying
It
almost.
is, and it's very subjective. And it's
Yeah.
also a
Hmm.
very privileged kind of conversation, too. It could be a number of things. There's
Oh
so many
goodness.
moving pieces to this. I think that the point that I'm trying to make, and we know to do this, we call, but also, let me say this because I think I'm jumping issues. I've gotten excited. And so
I
I'm
got you. I got you going.
run all this together and mix it all up and make a fruit cake is what's happening. But I think that so several things. One, I think that there are some instances where we can do both. Also, call out to call in.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
don't even want to totally like it suggest it's got to be one or the other. I think both can happen in some scenarios as well. But I think it's about like and it's a process perhaps. We know how to love on each other.
Mhm.
We do. But also because we say things, think about the things that we say in our community. We got us. These
Yeah.
are resistance themes that we use
I
when
love
we're
us.
when we are in in when we are operating as a collective. We got us. We say things like nobody's coming to save us. That's a rallying point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When we hear people say that to each other, that's a
Mm.
rallying point. Like we it's us.
I hear you.
We
Yeah.
say things, we jokingly defer to Nito Brown quote or whatever, the
Oh, and my
rooftop
brother, am I
scene,
my brother's
or
keeper?
CMB, we all we got.
Oh yeah, we got. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that wasn't the best scenario, but we have recycled that. We
Yeah.
have taken that and recycled that, and we use it. We all we got. Those become points of where the collective, where there's a
Mm-hmm.
collective understanding and there's this pronouncing, right? That we love on each other and we like it's us at the end of the day, no matter what, good, bad, or indifferent, it all comes full circle. We got us.
I mean, but there are these situations, in the hood where you have the Nino Browns of the hood who actually, on the low, they're actually the protectors. Like they
Well,
are doing what they're doing because they're like, well, nobody else is trying to bring money to the block. Nobody else is trying to break off some bread to this family that's hungry over here. So I'm doing this so they can eat.
well, you've
And
actually come full. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I mean I mean yeah, they're doing what they're doing, and we wish they wouldn't do it, but we understand why they're doing it, and especially when we get to know who they are. And it's like that dude isn't bad at all. He's doing this because he doesn't see another way. And he is gonna break some rules so that this family can eat, that family can eat, that kid can have some books, that kid can have this kid can have toys. I mean, I've seen this. I mean, I've seen this
Absolutely.
in action.
But that's just it. It calls for a paradigm shift to be able to think about that and recognize it as what you just said, as the protectors. I actually have written a book about that, right? It's my second book. It's book two. You can't
Which is
stop the
called
revolution. You can't stop the revolution, community disorder and social ties in post Ferguson America. So, what you're speaking about specifically are the social ties that I call attention to in that book. It is about these kinship relationships that we have, where the world would say things like they can't get along, they don't come together for nothing unless somebody is killed by the police. That's the only time you see them come together. Then they in the streets. They don't come together. They don't stand together. They don't rally together for nothing else. They don't get these people just shooting and killing each other. They're just shooting and killing each other. And so in that book, I talk about this idea of, yes, being caught between perhaps neighborhood crime, and then in many of our disproportionately black communities, but then also it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
either the state, either being up against the state harm or being up against crime, harm in the community. And how that emerges is that, to give you a quick summation, how that emerges is that in the first few hours of the Ferguson uprising, a call went out to the world. There was a call, a direct call of action that went out to the world. Most folks didn't even get it. I got it because I was there documenting. And that call was about a rallying. It was a cry to rally people against the two things that seem to be most detrimental to the Black community. And those two things seem to be either gun violence, neighborhood gun violence that was taking our people out in record numbers, or either police brutality and state action that was taking people
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
Like you kind of being caught between, like those were the two things in that moment. Like it wasn't a we need to just rally against police brutality. No, the call was to come together because there are two forces that are working against our community. It is it is gun violence, communal gun violence, but then also, or what we would say, you know, um, yeah, intimate gun violence in the community, but then also police violence, state violence. And so the fight was, or at least the call was, to counter both. And
Hmm.
so, with
Hmm.
having said that, I started to look at what our community does to protect itself.
Yeah.
What does the black community do to protect itself against these two fronts? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. People feeling like, at least many poor black people particularly, feeling like if the police don't get me, the boys on the block gonna get me.
Right.
It's
Right.
just that simple. Like I can't win, you know. And so I started looking specifically, like, how do we navigate these two things, right? These two very real concerns and very imminent dangers for one another. And what I found is that, yes, some of the folks that are in the neighborhoods, who have been identified as some of the most destructive members of the community, in many respects are not necessarily that. They are what we can think about as, engaging in unconventional. That's what it is. They're engaging, a lot of them are engaging in unconventional actions.
And
And
they're
I
willing
say
to, and they're,
unconventional actions because they're doing things that are for the sake of surviving, but even in it, are doing things that seem to be very protective of the people in the neighborhood.
yeah.
They're
And
unconventional, and they don't align with, ideas about order, so to speak. So I challenge that. That's where disorder comes in. It's the idea that because people are engaging, and I'm not saying this to dismiss the fact that people are in some respect doing criminal things, but
absolutely right.
it is to be clear that crime that often happens in some of these communities, or our disproportionately black communities, where we see these crime, higher rates of crime playing out, that's always happening with a select few. It's a
Yeah.
few.
Yeah.
Again, it's about how we see ourselves and how people project us. And so it's a select few. that are committing
Mm.
crimes. It's not the whole community that's
Uh,
crime ridden. All the black people there, it's a horrific thing. No, it's a few. It's always just a few. But majority of the people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, where you have some of these things taking place, are actually doing things every day to protect one another, to protect themselves, to protect one another, to build themselves, to build one another. But that is not the narrative. That's not the narrative. And so that's the part I'm saying needs to be operationalized. This narrative of love. We're not talking about the ways in which people engage in these social ties, these networks in community day to day, where they checking for each other, they're taking care of each other, and we don't necessarily identify them as acts of love because they're unconventional, so much so until they don't align with white ideas about, about what love means, and
yeah.
how, and they don't necessarily align with, these ideas about the upper echelon of society, and how we should live. Well, no, they're not, because that makes for a whole other dynamic when you got people who are impoverished. That's not going to line up with a white upper class, wealthy middle class kind of. And so I'm not saying, and I also want to say, I'm trying to be clear, because somebody would throw out there, yeah, there's a culture of poverty. Yeah, no, that is pathology also. So, no, I'm also not pushing this idea that there's this culture of poverty that black folks just like to know. What I am saying is that people in our community, those who are existing in what has been very compromised circumstances time and time again, and accumulatively, have therefore then created and found alternate methods and routes for taking care of one another, for trying to survive, trying to make it, trying to check for themselves, trying to check for those around them in ways that are not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily get talked about or understood as love.
So, give me some last thoughts here about how people can put this in motion. How do we communicate it, or what do we do, or both?
I feel like I said so much just a minute ago. I'm telling you, we've made a fruitcake today.
So,
And I
okay.
really don't mean that. And so I would say to the audience, I really, it's a lot. There's a lot to unpack here. I think that one of the things that I want to point out is that we, when we're wounded, whether we're talking about, self love, romantic love, whether we're talking about community love broadly, when we are not healthy, like we can think about our physical bodies, when we are physically injured,
Mhm.
it affects our mobility, it affects the way we move and groove, right, physically. And so I'm just saying, let's think about, like, what must that impact be when we are emotionally we are facing harm, or have had to endure that time and time again. And it's almost as a continuum. And might that also skew the way we see ourselves, our understanding of what we deserve, as a people, how we give, what we
Yeah.
give out as
Yeah.
a people, how we even think about it and talk about it even. And so I'm just kind of hoping that at minimum, this will just strike a chord where we can really think about, how we, who are we? Like, how do we think about ourselves? Am I the child, the grown up? I'm an adult, right? But is that child one of those kids in that baby doll study? Is that my inner me? Is that me? Is that little girl or that little boy that didn't see anything wonderful in the black baby doll, is that me? Is Are there components of me that battle with that? Because if so, then how do I move from that place? There's a reciprocal relationship in terms of how I identify, or whether I know who I am as in blackness, what that means, but then also what does that mean for how I see and identify even with my people. And sometimes we arrive at that place and our ability to like really hone in on some of those things. I think we arrive through at that through different experiences. There's an I believe a circular and a interactive relationship between collective engagement and how we think about ourselves, but also how we think about ourselves as a collective, how we engage. I think one of the things that you and I also talked about was this individualistic society, and so how we move individually versus how we move collectively, there's a relationship there, right? And so, what I would say to you in closing, to your point, I think that we the ability to even be able to think about this deeper a lot of times is not even afforded to us. I think that that might warrant some privilege. I talked about that earlier, like some arriving at these places where we can have these conversations sometimes is rooted in privilege.
Hmm.
Me being able to say, you know what, I, Eddie, I took some time and I really sat down and thought, well, who, if you sitting here and you're unraveling because you don't know how your lights are going to be cut on, or you're waiting for them to be cut off, I don't know that you had a space or the benefit, right? To be able to sit and say, I meditated. I
Yes.
took the day and I just thought through some things, and I thought about who I was and how I felt about my feelings and my emotions and all those guys. There's a process, and and that means different things for different people is what I'm saying. And I don't want to be a person that, sort of leverage this as if like there's this one size fit all to how we arrive at this place. I think the point that I'm making is, or really hoping to do, is maybe have some light bulb moments that develop that we can continue to think about and go further and dig deeper into what it means, to know who I am, not who I've been told I am, like by
Yes.
the broader
Yes.
society, but to understand like who I am, and to
Hmm.
really be able to identify and understand and own and walk in my worth, my
Hmm.
true worth, and what it means to really be able to experience my humanity. Like I should have the liberty and the freedom of being able to explore and experience full on humanity. I'm not property. Understanding that my people are not property, even though we still have a society that treats us as property, yeah, as laborers, only only having a relationship only as good as our relationship is to the production of labor. There's still space for that to only be thought of as a number,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to be canceled when, when we don't necessarily, when we're no longer needed, or or quote unquote identified as usable, or word,
Hmm.
whatever the case might be. I think that I would just like for us to think about that a little more, and to know that we are capable of love. We do absolutely deserve love. And so and I think we in part can think about that and grow in that when we surround ourselves with people who also emulate that. I want to be surrounded by people. Even if I'm unable to do that individually, I know that things like civic engagement, sometimes maybe, attaching myself to programs and organizations that are rooted in empowerment, maybe that in that space, I can develop some tools. And maybe if I'm a person that is willing to work community and engage in community, maybe the love for community also creates space where then I ultimately start to be able to also love me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot.
It is,
There's a
and it is,
lot here.
and it is
Oh my
all
gosh.
It is all good. Dr. Andrea Boyles, our good friend at WBOK.
Does any of this make sense?
It all makes sense. It definitely
Oh my
makes sense.
God.
I appreciate you.
Oh my goodness. I appreciate you too. Sorry, y'all. We can do this. We're going to get through this together. We are. Because that's what we do. There's so much here. Oh my goodness. But I want to be clear. I'm a part of that process too. And every day it's an opportunity to learn. So I'm learning all of this too.
All right. Let me